I had a friend once, and he went to military school. The thing about this friend was that he was a little socially awkward and didn't really have, like, a group of friends yet. He didn't really have a community. And the thing about military school is that, you know, you're placed into a regiment, and in that regiment, you're going to have your guys, right? Those guys are the guys you are riding with and dying with for the entire year. And, well, he didn't quite fit in with everyone, and he was actually picked on a lot, too. And he was in particular picked on by this one guy from this different regiment. And, well, the worst thing that this guy did was he went inside of his, his area, his room, his quarters, and he stole his towel, he stole his toothbrush, he stole his almost everything. He stole his uniform as well. And so, what they did, the next morning, actually, when the drill sergeant's coming by and he's making sure everyone's ready to go, because, military school, you got to be ready at this time. Everyone's got to be ready or everyone gets punished. He's standing there next to his bed, and drill sergeant comes by and says, "What are you doing? Why don't you have clothes on? Why haven't you brushed your teeth? Why haven't you taken a shower?" He's like, "Sir, everything was stolen, sir." And the entire regiment got punished. They all had to run laps around the school's perimeter, and that was no tiny school, I'll tell you that. So, this guy's now like, oh, great. Everyone's just going to hate me now. It's just that. I'm going to be hated by everyone. I have no friends, definitely. But one of the guys in the regiment was around just doing his normal stuff throughout the day, and he overhears the guy who was messing with him, like, bragging about it. He's like, "Yeah, dude, I stole all this stuff," and the entire regiment got, completely got in trouble, and they had to run laps around the school. And we'll just say that they took that to heart. So what they ended up doing was that they, the entire regiment got in on this time. My friend didn't, because he was kind of involved before. He just didn't want anything to do with it. But his entire other regiment, his guys, they not only stole everything that guy owns, but they threw it in the lake, and they harassed him for the next 3 years. Like, literally. That's how personal that they took this. And after that, my friend was happy. Like, it was like, oh, I actually have a community here, Like, I have a group of friends. I have people who I can trust. And those guys, they love each other. They'll die together. They'll ride together. Everything like that. And my friend finally felt at home, kind of, for as much as home can be. But we'll look at that and we'll say, that's awesome. He's got people now. He never did before. But, man, did they have to harass him for 3 extra years? Did they have to throw everything out, like in the lake? They threw everything of his, like everything and nothing. And I think that goes to show that there's no perfect community. There's no perfect group of friends. Guys, you will be failed by people. The church community, we will fail you one day. We're not going to be perfect. Your friends, they're going to fail you. Your family, they will fail you. Everyone is going to fail you at some point. And it's so important, though, that while we are in the community that we are in, that yes, we know they will fail us, but we want to strive to make sure that the community that we are in is the best version of it that it can possibly be. Yes, they will fail, everyone will fail, but that doesn't mean that we don't try hard to be an effective part in that community. And this is exactly what Paul's instructing in the Corinthian people in his second letter to them in 2 Corinthians on how to actually build a good community around Jesus Christ, around their faith. And so, for some context for everything, this letter is written after 1 Corinthians, surprise, and it is written around 57 AD. Not really too sure exactly when the exact years at this point, still very early in Paul's ministry during this time. But this is after Paul's written that first letter, but it seems that some of the people actually did not accept his rebuke from the first letter. So if you remember last week's message, 1 Corinthians was all about Paul just calling them out on all this junk that they were doing, all the sin that they were doing. This guy was sleeping with his stepmom. They were over here fighting about this food here and that food there. There was no order in their church services. This church was just whack, doing everything that they wanted without any instruction at all. They were just going crazy, and people didn't feel welcome to actually come in. And so that first letter was to address all of those issues. So after Paul wrote that letter, though, many of the people still did not accept what Paul wrote to them. But then, what that led to was what Paul would call the painful visit. As he says in the beginning of 2 Corinthians, Paul actually went and visited them. And it was a painful visit because it was kind of like you going to a friend and confronting them for like the 5th time about that really, or like the 2nd or 3rd time about that bad thing that they did to you that hurt you. No one likes this conversation. Someone's going to blow up. Everyone's going to get hurt, but it has to happen. And so that's what the painful visit was about. Paul was just saying, guys, you are loving your sin, and you're just not doing anything about it. Paul was confronting them about all those things, and so that's why he had to go visit them. And so then, after that, this is where we get to this letter. 2 Corinthians actually isn't 2 Corinthians. It's technically kind of 3 Corinthians, because he wrote other letters to them before, and Paul talks about one of those letters in the first few verses of this book. But we don't have access to that letter. We never found that letter for whatever the reason. God did not allow that letter to be found by the Christians and to be mass-produced and be a part of the Bible, for whatever the reason is. But now we're in technically 3 Corinthians, but obviously we could talk about it as 2 Corinthians. But this is Paul's third and final letter to them. And the point of this letter isn't to rag on them. It isn't to, continuously call them out for what they did, because Paul already did a really good job of that. But the point of this letter is community. That is the theme. Paul's main goal in this letter is to reunite a community that is still divided by pride and by all those issues that we had before. You see, because some people still did not accept Paul's writings and his leadership, and Paul wants to reunite everyone. And the thing that Paul will use as the glue to reunite them all is the thing that is already uniting them all, and that is Jesus, the very Jesus whom they all claim to follow. And so Paul, through this letter, is going to show us and them that followers of Christ, they will live lives that will be changed. In that, as a Christian now, your life is going to look different than you before you were a Christian. That if you believing in Jesus and understanding his death on the cross will cause you to live differently because of the magnitude of what Jesus has done for us. And so, Paul, throughout this letter, is going to point out how all the ways that they are living is not building up a good community. So let me say that again. Paul, throughout this letter, is pointing out how the way that they are living is not going to be building up a good community. And so, I'm going to be focusing on 4 of those major points today. And so, he starts off in chapter 3 with pointing out their lack of trust in leadership. You see, like I said before, some of the Corinthians still did not believe that Paul was who he said he was, or at least that Paul was up to snuff, that he was actually someone who they can believe and who that they can trust in. They wanted proof of Paul's authority, and they wanted a letter of recommendation from the other apostles to really prove that that we can believe him. But Paul finds that really strange. So in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, look at verses 1 through 3. It says, "Are we beginning to commend ourselves again? Or do we need, or some do, letters of recommendation to you or from you? You yourselves are our letter of recommendation, written on our hearts, to be known, to be read by all. And you show that you are a letter from Christ, delivered by us, written not in ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts." Paul's point in that is simple. And he's saying that, guys, remember, without me, and he's not saying this because, look how amazing I am, but he's saying, without me, you wouldn't know who Jesus is. You are my letter of recommendation. What more is needed than this? You see, the Corinthians, they tried to discredit Paul. They didn't believe, or they didn't want to put all the weight in him because Paul confronted them on their sin. They tried to make everyone else believe that he couldn't be trusted, and they did that because they were called out for their sin in the first letter. And that is no way to treat your leadership. That is no way to treat the people who are pouring into your life. A community that can't trust their leaders will never go anywhere. It will break apart instantly. Every community needs a leader, and all they were doing was running away from taking responsibility for their actions, and so they just blamed it on Paul, saying, we don't trust you. Who are you? I don't know who you are. That's what they were doing. A community that can't trust their leaders is a community that will never grow. But don't worry, leaders don't get off scot-free. Paul has a lot to say about them at the end of this book, and we'll talk about that when we get to that. But now in chapters 4 through 7, Paul brings up their false view of success. So that's the second point today, success. How do they view success, and how is that breaking down their community instead of building it up? So chapters 4 through 7. But first to say, the Corinthians, like we've gone over already, did not have an amazing opinion of Paul. You see, they viewed his life, and they looked at it from far away, and they saw someone who was always getting persecuted, constantly getting beat up, stoned like crazy, and that really hurts a lot. He was always poor, he had nothing to his name, and he never seemed to stand up for himself. He never really kind of stuck it to other people and got revenge. And when you look at someone like that, you'll say, oh, he's a weakling. And that's exactly how they're viewing him. How can this guy be Paul? How can he have seen Jesus? This is Paul we're talking about, right? Paul would never be like that. Like this, I don't believe it anymore. Paul's lost his, he's lost his charisma. He's not the leader he once was. Look at the situation he's in. Well, due to those features, the negative features of Paul, or at least how they would view it as negative, they decided, you know what? We're not listening to him anymore. Because what does he know? He has nothing. He's poor. He's got nothing to him, right? But Paul completely destroys them on this idea and how twisted of a view this is of success. And we only need to look at one verse to see that. So turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 21. Or is it chapter 6? I don't know. I don't have it. I know it's verse 21 though. So sorry, it's either 4, 5, 6, or 7. One of those. But bear with me, just listen. It says, "For our sake, speaking of Jesus, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." You guys might recognize that verse from maybe a song, but it's one that holds true, and the ones that we all remember, that Jesus died so that we can be the righteousness of God. In him we might become the righteousness of God. Paul reminds them of one single fact, and that is that the person who saved him, Jesus, he wasn't necessarily a lot to talk about. He didn't have a lot of money. Jesus was not the best looking, the Bible would describe. Jesus was persecuted. Jesus was killed. Jesus was everything like that. Jesus is just like Paul in that way. We don't look at Jesus and say, wow, he had a lot of money. Oh, he was all powerful. He had armies underneath his hand. He could just send anyone away. Like he was rich, loaded. No, in fact, Jesus, he was of no regard. People didn't look at him and say, I want to be friends with him, because he wasn't really on the outside. He didn't look like too much. That's how the Bible would describe him. Paul points out that their idea of what a successful person is, someone who's wealthy, who has charisma, who's good looking, all these things, it betrays Jesus. It goes against the way that Jesus lived life himself. A successful person isn't someone who has all this money, all this power, all this fame, but instead a successful person is someone who every day strives to live like Christ, to live the life that Christ modeled for us. No one would ever say Jesus wasn't successful. In fact, he was the most successful person ever to live. He had the most impact more than any other person that's ever lived in this world, not to mention he created everything. Like, how much more successful can you be? And so Paul is pointing out the hypocrisy of the Corinthian church. He's saying, like, guys, you're looking at me and saying, I'm not successful. You can't trust my word because I'm poor and I'm getting beaten up all the time. But look at your Savior. Your idea of success is wrong. Instead, success is a person, is someone who lives their life every day trying to be more like Christ. I got really hyped up for that one. But finishing with this point, when a community has a warped idea of what success looks like, it will lead to elitism across the entire community. When someone says, oh, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Look how small his house is. He doesn't have any idea what he's talking about. Look at the job that they have. Look at the job that she has. They don't know what they're talking about. When we get into a mode like that, all that's going to lead to is people thinking that they're better than others. And Paul's saying that is not how you build up a community at all. And don't worry, I know I'm just talking about how Paul is saying that these are issues, but don't worry, there's an answer to all of them at the end. But now continuing to number 3, Paul in chapters 8 and 9, he's going to point out their lack of generosity and how that is going to completely destroy their community. So, generosity in chapter 8 and 9. During this time, the church in Jerusalem was going through a very bad financial crisis. And we spoke a little bit about this back in the book of Galatians. But in this time, the church in Jerusalem had nothing. They had no money at all. So Paul was getting all the churches that he's planted, all the churches he knew, to try to donate just a little bit of money to them so that they can help them. And that's supposed to be a generous gift from their fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. And so Paul reached out to the Corinthian church, but the Corinthian church didn't want to give anything. Cheapskates. They didn't want to give anything. And in fact, they didn't give anything. And so, for this, Paul was livid. And the thing for him, that it wasn't even about the money. It wasn't even about the fact they didn't give any money in particular, but instead it was more about how, as Christians who are being changed every day by Jesus, who are walking with him, they should naturally desire to be generous. Paul will say this in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. I can't find the verse, but I'll put it here, because I forgot to write it down here too. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, it says, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that through his poverty might become rich." That you through his poverty might become rich. Let's just think about that for a second. This is a place where they don't see it important to be there for each other, to be generous to each other. And let's just think about how Jesus modeled generosity for us. And this verse says it perfectly. Jesus was the most generous person ever. Like it says, though he was rich, for our sakes became poor, and that you through his poverty might become rich. It was through Jesus lowering himself from God to being a man, well, he was still God and still man at the same time, that we now get to go to heaven. That through that we can become rich in eternity. And that's just crazy. And Paul is saying, look how big of a double standard this is. Look at the hypocrisy of this all. That you're not being generous here, but yet all you've ever been shown was generosity through your very own Savior who died for you in the most generous act in all of humankind. A healthy community of believers will want to be there for each other because their Savior was there for them as well. Another reason why this community is not a good community. And finally, in chapters 10 and 12, Paul is going to point out, and this is the fourth point, how the Corinthians had this blind love for what Paul would call these super apostles. These people who come by and they look awesome, they know about Jesus, they're preaching really well and really awesome, and yet they're in it just for himself. So he's calling them out on this community for having this blind love in these leaders that they really shouldn't. So like I said before, during this time, there would be these traveling pastors, right? Who would come by and impress everyone. They would be really able to speak well, they would look nice, and they would capture the crowds. And the Corinthians, what they would do is that they would compare those guys to Paul. And they determined, well, Paul wasn't as good as them. Look at Paul. Look at the situation he's in. Like, these guys are awesome. And instantly they're like, boom, better. And it kind of goes a little bit back to what their idea of success is as well. But Paul finds it funny that these super apostles, they tried to discredit him. They would come around and say, yeah, Paul, he has no idea what he's talking about. Look at the situation he's in. He's nothing. He's a horrible apostle. They would discredit him in front of all these people, and then these people would believe that. But Paul finds it funny because Paul can easily list off all the reasons why he's not inferior to them as they described. And so Paul kind of does that. So they would say that they knew the Bible. Well, guess what? Paul memorized the Bible. He knew a lot of it. They claimed that they knew Jesus. Well, guess what? Paul actually met with Jesus, the risen Jesus. Like, he actually spoke to him. I don't think anyone else can say that. They claim that, well, not that they claim, but they asked a lot for money from people, and a lot of it too, just because of their expertise and be able to be really well spoken and everything like that. Guess what? Paul never asked for anything. He came, he planted that church, he set it all up, and he left without ever asking for a thing. Paul's looking like the winner so far. Not to mention that Paul's given up everything, his entire life, to follow Christ. Paul, by far, so clearly, is definitely, very clear, to be the better. of those. But he didn't list off those reasons to look holier or to brag about that, but rather to show that ultimately all those things, they mean absolutely nothing. No one has any real reason to brag. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 30, it says, "If I must boast, I will boast on the things that show my weakness." So that first verse we're going to just sit on for one sec. But he says, if I'm going to boast, I will boast on the things that show my weakness. That's an interesting statement. Paul's saying, if I'm going to boast about anything, I'm not going to boast about how I know this, I know that, all these other things here. I'm this apostle, I was a Pharisee, blah, blah, blah. No, if I'm going to boast about anything, I'm going to boast about the things that I'm weak in. And, well, when you read that, you're like, well, Paul, that makes no sense at all, because you can't boast about things you don't do well. Well, that connects with a different verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, in verse 9. So 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 says, "But he said to me, my grace," and this is the Lord speaking to Paul, "my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." What an amazing promise that we have. No matter all the amazing ways that we are gifted, which we're all gifted by God, as a side note, Paul's saying, I'm not going to boast in any of those things. Instead, I'm going to boast in my weakness. And the reason for that is because, well, it's my weakness. And the thing is, though, that God is going to work through me. And what he's going to do is, if his grace is sufficient for me, for his power is made perfect in that weakness. Guys, if God is working through all your weaknesses, then guess what? He's the only one who can take glory for that. No one else. No one else is going to do that. We can boast about the fact that we are weak because our God is making us strong. And what an amazing thing that is. That's how powerful our God is. That's how amazing and loving our God is. That we don't even need to boast about anything. God is working for us constantly. There's nothing that doesn't escape his mind about us. In everything that we do, we can boast about the fact that we have weaknesses because Christ is working through us, is making us better through them as well. And so, this brings us to the application, right? This brings us to the conclusion. And the one conclusion that we can come to about the community aspect of all of this is that the most effective way to form a healthy community is to think of yourself as nothing special, or to be humble. That's what Paul is really getting at with all this. You see, when we're humble, that will lead to us being more inclusive of others as they join. We won't have this elitist mentality. When we're humble, we're not thinking of ourselves as greater. We're not going to think we're better than other people. And so we'll include the other people that join, that come by, and you know what? We're not much better than them. They believe in Jesus, then man, that's amazing. We're not better than them, though. When we're humble, leaders, they won't exalt themselves, but rather, they're going to exalt Jesus. You see, the whole thing with leaders, too, is that, Paul was never looking and desiring to be loved by everyone. All he was doing was living a life that was modeled, that Jesus modeled for him. That Jesus models for every one of us. And so the right leader what is he going to do? He's going to live a life where he's pointing others to Jesus and not taking things for himself. So naturally, you shouldn't have these super apostles, but instead, you should have humble leaders who love their congregations. When we're humble, we become more generous as well. We think of others before ourselves, and it's not about us anymore, but instead it's about loving our brothers and sisters. When we're humble, we can respectfully disagree and healthily love each other through arguments. Isn't that amazing? I know. I bet you have a lot of arguments right now with all your siblings because everyone's stuck in one house. But when you're humble, what's the point of fighting? What's the point of winning? What's the point of making sure that everyone knows that you're right? It's like you can respectfully love each other, have arguments with each other, and love each other properly when you're not seeking to always win. When we're humble, you're able to forgive people of the things that they've done. It's one of the things that Paul is showing us here in these chapters. Paul is forgiving them of all the things that they've done against him. We haven't even thought about this, but they've done a lot to really sully Paul's reputation. Like, they really have. They gone out of their way to make sure that Paul knew that he was a jerk, that he was worthless. But Paul didn't care. Paul was willing to love them and forgive them through it all because he didn't see himself. He wasn't, like, personally offended and all these things. Like, no, he was just like, I'm just a follower of Jesus. Like, everyone deserves forgiveness. When we're humble, that will lead us to be able to forgive other people of the things that were done. And ultimately, when we are humble, true community will begin to grow in our lives. It is so easy to become friends with someone who just doesn't think that they're all that. Who doesn't think that they're this amazing person. No one likes those people. No one. Not a single person. And so now, some questions just to think about. You know, this is for me too and for you as well. Like, ask yourself, have you been doing what you should be doing to build up the community around you? Have you been generous to your friends? Have you been giving of them? Have you been actually offering your help? Have you been not respecting the leadership in your church? Is that something that's really hard for you? Is that something that you've had a difficult time doing? You know, like, that's something that's difficult for me at times as well too. It's difficult for everyone to respect people that way. Have you been someone who's been going out of your way to make sure that everyone knows that you love them? Or are you known as someone who is, I don't want to go talk to that person, well, because, you know, they're really mean to me and I don't really like them that much? Are you someone who views success as something that is only monetary? Or are you only going to be willing to be friends with people who have nice things? What are you doing to damage the community around you? And just take a really critical look at yourself and ask yourself, what am I doing right now that's damaging the community around you? And then let's switch that. Like, no sin is unforgivable. Let's actually use that and say, okay, now what can I do to better that? What can I do now to change? Maybe I should be friends with those people. Maybe I should be more inclusive. Maybe I should change my opinion on that over there because of, well, whatever the reason might be. Maybe it's time for you to forgive that person or to extend forgiveness or say, hey, I forgive you for what you've done, and stop holding a grudge about that. All of this is only possible, though, through Jesus. Every single thing. That's one of the main things that Paul is talking about. The paradox of the cross. In that, when we believe in Jesus, we take on his morals, we take on his way of life, we change, and then now that will push us to then treat people and our situations differently. The only way to become humble, the only way to truly love people, is to know Jesus' love first. And that's what this all comes down to. So guys, my application for all of you is to take a look at yourself and ask, what can I be doing to better improve the community around us, even right now, in the middle of the coronavirus season? What can I do? Whether that's forgiving the friend, whether that's apologizing for what you've done, whether that's reaching out to those people you've been neglecting, whether that's respecting your leadership, whatever it might be, let's do that, and let's seek to be better Christians and more like Jesus. I love you guys. I'll see you next week.